So, Craig, this is a difficult one because enemies are named that for good reason.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah.
So my first question is, I feel like this empathy conversation, this loving conversation, is an intellectual and logical one when you have some type of perspective. So when you are kind of under someone's foot and they're on your neck and really all you want to do is punch them in the face, metaphorically speaking.
Yeah, right, okay.
Metaphorically speaking.
Asking for a friend.
Yes. How do you fast forward to that perspective? Is there something that we can do to gain kind of that perspective to get into that logical phase?
I think that right there, I would stop someone and say, we need to pause on that word fast forward. This is not an overnight process. Like, it's not like your enemy attacks you, and then all of a sudden, like, the next day, you're like, well, Jesus told me to love my enemies, so we're all good now, right? This is a journey and a process, and I think it's good to have in mind what the end goal looks like. Okay, maybe it's not me having them over for dinner, but maybe it's I don't wake up every day thinking about them. Or someone says their name, and I don't instantly think like, oh, I hope something bad happens. So if you go 3 days without thinking about them, celebrate that. And you'll be caught off guard because you'll start thinking about them again. You'll be like, oh, maybe I should celebrate that because that was one of my goals. I think that us paying attention to what we want to get to is really helpful, and then also having a lot of patience with ourselves, because the whole reason this is difficult is because you've been hurt. And it's okay if you're really hurt one day, not so hurt the next day, and then hurt even more the day after, even though nothing's changed. So we're human beings. We have beating hearts. We have eyes that cry. And I think that we have to just acknowledge that this is not going to be a linear journey.
So the word enemies, I'm a definitions person.
Yeah.
So the word enemies, it has many definitions and how we interpret them. Enemies could be a very big oppressor, it could be an abuser, it could be someone who is not sorry for how they're treating you, and they're treating you very unjustly. So what does it mean to love someone who is not sorry and you're actively being torn down by them? Mm-hmm. Is it loving afar? Like, what is that definition of loving, and what are the actions as Christians we are called to do in that scenario?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's really important to point out, Jesus doesn't say, love your enemies only if they're sorry. And I think that we often give away our own happiness or own identity as a loving person because we expect something from someone else before we can be who God has called us to be. And I think that's what Jesus is trying to break through at this point, is he's trying to remind us that we are grounded as loving beings, and no matter how bad your enemy has treated you, you can still find a way to be a loving person and experience love in this life. Obviously, I'm white, cisgender, heterosexual. There's a lot of oppression and pain from enemies that have been caused from people that look like me, or pain and oppression that I haven't been aware of, that I've never had to face, which of course is an injustice. That's why I would encourage you to always listen to diverse perspectives. There are women who have talked about overcoming misogyny and finding, that a man's bad behavior didn't define them for the rest of their life. You've seen all sorts of different things, whether it's Archbishop Tutu or other people who have gone through stuff that is just cringy to read their experience, and they've somehow found a way to find that life is good. My guess is if you could get them off the record and you were sitting down and you had a relationship with them, they would not tell you that everyone's a great person. They would say, though, that they've found a way to still be a loving person in spite of that other person. And they wouldn't, I think that they'd be at the point where they just can say, I wish them nothing but the best, which is sometimes as far as love can take us. And I think that that's a lot farther than some people have been currently, and I think that's possible for everyone.
Can we define that love? So does love mean interaction? Does it mean relationship? What does loving mean with that oppression?
Yeah, I think it's a posture more than anything. And for me, that posture is just an understanding that I live with love. I have been hurt. I will do my best to make sure I don't get hurt that way again. And at the same time, it's a posture as you interact with your close friends and family that understand the pain that you've gone through, and you can say a bit more. It's also a posture as you start to go out in public circles and you speak to people out there about what your experience has been like. I think there's varying levels there. I think that in therapy, you can be loving and just say the worst things possible about your enemy there, because we all have to have those environments. And therapy is just a space where you can say anything without any consequence. So I think that embracing those environments and understanding where they are, and also forgiving yourself when you've misread an environment, and making amends when you need to, I think it's more about a posture with yourself than it is dependent on your enemy's behavior or response to who you are, would be the way that I would answer that.
So not necessarily does this loving process change anything for the enemy.
I think that if you give that away, you will probably be disappointed, I would say 99 times out of 100. There is the 1 out of 100 that happens, and I think it's possible. So I want anyone to know, if you feel like you're estranged from a family member, I would never say that it will never happen that you can reconcile. I do believe that good things can happen and people can change. I think that it's important, though, to keep your expectations in check and to never allow someone else to determine your own happiness, and for you to do the best you can, regardless of what they're doing.
Should we get to some
Yeah, let's do it.
questions? Yeah.
Let's do it. Those were great questions, by the way, Olivia.
Okay, instead of toxic, how about abusive?
So abuse is tough. There's no other way to say it. I will tell you, I personally have not been physically abused. And my heart breaks for anyone that has. And for me to say that you can't label someone abusive is then me coming in, like in that hierarchy that we saw, it's me moving up and saying you can't call someone abusive. So I want you to know I'm sorry. I want you to know there are mentors who have gone through this that can share that with you. There are therapists who can help you with that language. I would feel very bad standing in front of you, though, and saying abusive is something that you shouldn't say when I haven't gone through it myself. So that's the only reason I would hold off on that specific word. The toxic one, though, I'm very happy to talk about because I have been called toxic myself. I have also called other people toxic. I'm here among all of you as a friend, and I would say to that, I just haven't found it to be helpful at all. Great question.
Get to another one. Okay, how do you reconcile anger toward your enemies if you have to encounter them on a daily basis and cannot have space?
Yeah, that's a tough one. So for instance, Calvin Thompson, who is my counseling professor at La Sierra in seminary, he said to me, when you get divorced, when you don't have kids, you get divorced from someone. When you get divorced from someone when you have kids, you get divorced to them. So you have to continue to interact with them. There's no way around it, and not all divorces are amicable, as we all know, right? Amicable. And so I think that when it comes to that requires a lot of nuance. I mean, you have to constantly remind yourself that I will not allow their bad behavior to dictate how I behave, and it will feel like you're losing every time. And you will question, am I doing the right thing here by not lowering myself to a level and fighting back? I will tell you, I've been there. I may currently be there on some things. And I would say to that, it's just this constant commitment to saying, I will not allow their bad behavior to dictate who I am, because I believe I am a loving person created in God's image, and I will always call myself back to that. This is why we did the Q&A on this one, is because these are the questions I know people have.
So love is very abstract. What does the action of love look like? Isn't it different for different situations?
Absolutely. Absolutely, it's different for different situations. And that's why it's hard for me to say love for your enemies looks like this, because there's all these different situations that are represented here, right? And so for me to say your love for your enemy needs to look like this, well, when Jesus was talking about loving tax collectors, it was going to their house and having dinner with them, which I never have recommended in pastoral ministry to anyone who's struggling with an enemy, and I probably never will. So it does depend on the situation, and that's why it's important to work through solutions and not just venting all the time with the people who can help you figure out what the best way forward is.
I love what you're saying, because basically loving does not mean putting yourself in harm's way.
No, yeah, and you should never have to love your enemy at the expense of yourself. Now, you can obviously love yourself too much at the expense of your enemy. That's a different conversation. But you shouldn't have to like say things that are dishonest to your enemy to make them happy. You shouldn't have to just be a doormat that is willing to give someone whatever they want. You should always love yourself while you are also trying to hold love for your enemy in whatever space that is.
Okay, I get that the Jews were heavily persecuted. Does that mean you need to continue to open yourself to abusive people?
So once again, there's that abusive word, which physical harm, I would say, space is necessary, period. There are healthy boundaries. There are also harsh and cruel boundaries. And I think that I've heard little discussion about the harsh and cruel boundaries as opposed to people saying, I need to set up boundaries. I look at that, and there are people that you have to constantly open yourselves to. There are other people that you can go put a little bit of space between you and see them every now and then, and there are people that you can leave completely. At the same time, if you're angry toward them and wishing bad things and like constantly thinking about them, I would say that's more of the concern about loving our enemy and the part that we're missing out on than like a specific action of drawing closer to them. For me, at the very least, loving your enemy is wanting something good for them in a different phase or a different walk of life. I feel like that is like kind of the ground floor of loving your enemies. Should we do one more?
Okay, how do you see restorative justice as a guide for conflict resolution between enemies?
Oh, so restorative justice is the idea that instead of punishing somebody that they've done something wrong, like our whole legal system is that instead, when they've done something wrong, you think to yourself, how do I restore this person to society in a way that they don't want to do something like this again? I think that restorative justice always has to start with there are no unforgivable sins. Because if the idea is that some sins get restorative and some sins don't, that's a major problem because all of a sudden that line will keep moving to whatever it is that you want. So it has to start with like this universal acceptance that there is nothing that would cause me to say that this person needs to be put away in prison for the rest of my life, which is obviously a challenge for us as Americans, but the longest prison sentence in Germany is 14 years. And so that's a different system. I'm not saying it's better. I will say our system is pretty broken. But I think that when it comes to restorative justice and how it begins with a conflict resolution or a guide, it's reminding yourself like this person did something very bad. However, if they say they're sorry to you and they want to be restored, it's not you holding it over their head all the time, is the first thing. If they never say they're sorry and they live their own life, it's you being willing to say, I will make sure that I never do that again. And if I do, I will take the steps necessary to make it right because I know how painful this is. So that's what I would say is restorative justice. Thank you so much for your thoughtful questions. Thank you for your thoughtful questions. We're going to have a few questions up here, and then we'll sing one last song.